Hello, Ammon.
When the wind hits it,
Hey, how are you doing?
Doing all right. You're live on the air with me, Ammon. We were just going over your new video with the BLM. Welcome to the show, folks. Real quick, let's give a quick introduction. This is Ammon Bundy from the Bundy family with the Bundy Ranch that we've been speaking about for about 3 weeks now about the Hammonds and how Ammon has kind of stepped into a kind of a public information officer, just kind of the voice of the Hammonds because they're so scared. So please, Ammon, if you could just give us a quick introduction for my listeners. I'm sure all of them know who you are and follow your work already, but for maybe someone that's just tuning in, could you give us a quick introduction to yourself and how you've begun interacting with the Hammond family?
Yeah, so Ammon Bundy, I'm the third son of Cliven Bundy, and I began interest in what was going on with the Hammonds just pretty much through some articles and so forth. And then I felt motivated, if you will. I really felt that I was supposed to go out to the Hammonds and visit with them, and I did that. I went out and spent a couple days with them out there. Spent the day out on the ranch helping them moving cattle and different things. Spoke with them in detail about what was going on. Then I spent the next day in Burns with them there and again got a lot of the details and began to dig into it really deep, find out that the Hammonds case is just tremendous. I don't even know how to say it in just a few sentences, but
It's a nightmare. It's a living nightmare.
It's a nightmare. They've just been abused and to the point where, I don't know, you almost can't believe it. And they've had a lot of faith in the federal court system, hoping that they could find justice there. And they spent upwards to $1 million in their defense. And all that it's resulted is just more and more abuse. It basically, what to try to sum it up, and then I'll try to sum it up the best I can. They basically have a beautiful ranch, and part of it goes up on the Steens Mountains. And the Steens Mountains have been the envy of environmentalists for some time, and they've about wrapped it all up by either driving the ranchers out or buying them out. And the Hammonds are pretty much the last ones. And they've refused to sell up there, and so they began a whole decade of vindictive behaviors. And you would love to say, well, it was just from environmentalists, but it wasn't. It was from federal agencies that have been infiltrated by power-hungry environmentalists, if you will. And they've done everything from, stealing the Hammonds' waters to fencing off their private properties where they can't access, to closing down roads so they can't go up to them, to arresting them, to threatening them by physical force. And then finally, after the Hammonds stood strong on all those things, they decided to use the court system, federal court systems, to ruin them to the point where they just won't stand anymore. And they did that through basically trumping up charges that they were terrorists by starting a backfire in 2006 and also a prescribed burn in 2001.
Now,
give you a little bit of background. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, these fires, these are very common events. I mean, we have prescribed burns up here in Montana all the time. Just going out and getting firewood today, I drove past probably 2 of them. And both of these fires were successful, and one of them then saved their property and helped to put out another major fire. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, the 2001 fire, they started on private property, and it was just a prescribed burn, which, again, you're right. The ranchers do prescribed burns every year. It's a necessity because what happens in that area, the grass grows good and it grows thick, and then, of course, it dries out. And if you don't get rid of that grass, either by grazing it or by burning it off, then the next year, new grass will not grow up, and you do not have a feed for your animals, and it's detrimental to the wildlife and everything else. So for the health and productivity of the land, you have to perform these prescribed burns. So you do them in late fall, so that the burns are under control, and they're a very normal thing. We even know the Native Americans did it before the ranchers in the West was developed. So it's just something that has always been done. And the Hammonds are very good at it. I mean, all the ranchers are. They know how to handle the fire. They know how to control it. Anyway, in 2001, they started a fire, and it did go over across their property line on their grazing land, and burnt 127 acres of grass, but it was their grazing rights, and they put it out themselves, no harm, no foul. But federal government took notice to that, and then 2006 came around. There was a massive wildfire started from lightning. I mean, it stretched clear across the whole Harney Basin, and it was burning up towards the Hammonds Ranch. And the Hammonds, again, understanding how to handle fire and understanding what a backfire does, because a backfire, you build it and then it goes and burns towards the fire, and then when the two fires hit together, they run out of fuel and they put themselves out. So the Hammonds started a backfire, and it burned, and they started on private property, and it burned towards the fire. As the fire came up, it hit the Hammonds backfire, and it put the fire out, and it saved a tremendous amount of their winter grass, and possibly even their homes, and who knows what else that fire would have done. It's been burning for several days.
Something like that, I would label those people heroes, not domestic terrorists.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, is they should have got a hero award for putting out the fire. And the other thing is, see, the BLM were up there, and they were, with their shovels and stuff. But the Hammonds were like, they had no intent on getting that fire out. And you got to think about it too. Is why would these firefighters who rely on their primary income to fight fires, and they get paid by the hour, like a tremendous amount of money, upwards of $40 an hour, some even more. They get paid by the hour to put it out to firefight. In every way, they're motivated not to put the fire out. And the Hammonds, they could see that what was going on, and they could see that there was no way, and they had no intent to putting these fires out. And so they built a backfire and saved their ranch. And just kind of as a side note, this backfire burned less than an acre of public ground. Most of the fire was on their private property.
Wow.
So anyhow, basically moving on, the Hammonds, or Stephen Hammond, was asked by one of the federal agents the next day if he would meet him for coffee in French Glen at the French Glen Hotel. And he goes in there, meets with them, and it was a setup. They arrested him. And they charged him with, it was actually a combination of sheriff and a BLM ranger, because the feds basically got involved and talked the sheriff into doing some of their dirty work, but there was a ranger there. And they arrested him, and then they charged him actually with state charges. Okay, so the feds didn't even, there wasn't even a federal charge at this time, and this is in 2006. And then the district attorney looked at the charges and looked at the evidence and everything, and basically said that there was no case here, that there was no crime that was committed, and so he did not take up charges and allowed the charges to expire. And then 5 years later, the U.S. Attorney's Office, so the U.S. Prosecuting Attorney Frank Papagni, they decided that they wanted. Again, this is all about motivation. They wanted to the Hammonds Ranch, and I'll tie that together. What I mean by that, there's plenty of evidence that that's exactly what this was all about. Anyway, they took up charges against the Hammonds, and this was 5 years later, and it was completely different charges. these charges had nothing to do with like what they were as terrorist charges. And so they charged the Hammonds as terrorists under the
How do they then begin to charge them as terrorists? So, I mean, it's not like they were trying to instill fear or, I can see the attacks that just happened this week being labeled as a terrorist attack, but I can't wrap my mind around them being labeled as terrorists.
No, and that's the thing is that's what's so egregious about this. I mean, the Hammonds, they've served. Dwight Hammond was president of the Farm Bureau for several years. I mean, you've got them serving in the community. You've got them donating. You have them, they're just outstanding people. And the federal government somehow, but really what it is, you got to look at the motive. See, if they can charge them as terrorists, then they can place these huge sentences on them, such as 5 years in federal prison, which is what they're getting. And you could also fine them a bunch of money and this and that, and you could ruin them and put them in duress and therefore force them to sell their ranch. Now, the interesting thing, because that's exactly what happened. They were charged. There was a tremendous amount of corruption in the court proceedings in the trial. For example, the judge only allowed the argument of whether the Hammonds started the fire or not. Well, the Hammonds always admitted they started the fire, so why was that the only argument allowed in the court? And the jury went back and said, hey, our job is to find out or to rule whether or to convict whether they started a fire or not. And so they convicted the Hammonds of starting the fire because they did start the fire. And then with that conviction, the jury says they're guilty of starting a fire, and the court, the federal court, then sentenced them as a terrorist.
Wow.
And sentenced them to 5 years in prison. They also got a statutory fine of $400,000 that they had to pay in 3 years. And then they have, along with several other things, they made them felons, so that here they are living 53 miles out of the closest town, and they can't even use a gun.
Wow, yeah, they can't own any guns.
Yeah, they can't own guns. They've watched their cattle just get eaten by and they can't do nothing about it.
Yeah, and you and I both know, maybe most people don't that live in town, but I mean, I live on a cattle ranch up here in Montana. You obviously live on a cattle ranch down there, and having a gun on you is a daily part of life because you never know when you're going to come across a bear or a wolf or whatever.
Yeah, it's a tool. It's a tool for protection. I mean, it's used daily, and it's necessary. And so, anyway, that's basically what happened there. So now they're charged as terrorists, and the minimum sentence was 5 years. But the trial judge actually said, "Hey, if I sentence them for 5 years for this crime, it would be a violation of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment." So he lessened the sentence and he sentenced Dwight, the father, for 3 months. And he sentenced Stephen, the son, for 12 months. And Stephen and Dwight went to prison. They fulfilled their sentence. They began to very diligently try to pay the fine. And at this point, they've paid about $200,000 of it. And they got out of prison thinking that, hey, they can get back to their life. They'll work hard and get this fine paid off, and they can move on. But then what happened is the prosecuting attorney, Frank Papagni, filed an appeal for the minimum sentence to the Ninth District Court of Appeals. And the Ninth District Court, of course, being its most liberal court in the whole United States, probably the whole world, they ruled that the Hammonds had to go back to prison for the remainder of the 5 years. So this is after. This is a few years, 2 years after the whole. They've already.
Now, Hammond Bundy, how?
Years after.
I'm sorry. Senior Hammond, how old is he? He's not a younger guy. This could have some detrimental effects on his health. I mean, he may not make it out.
He's 74 years old, and so he'll be 79 when he comes out. And so it's, knowing where he's going and, what he's going to be up against, there's a good chance that he will not come back to his family. Wow. And the thing is this is the other thing is this is where it's so egregious, because I said there was other parts of the sentencing, that other stipulations, and one of the stipulations were that the Hammonds had to sign a first right of refusal over to the BLM, over to the federal government. So first right of refusal, for anybody who doesn't know, means that if the San Hammonds sell their ranch, they have to sell it to the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. And so now what's happened is they put them in a situation where they fined them $400,000 and then only give them 3 years to pay it off. You got to understand, most of us don't have a mortgage of $400,000, and it takes us 30 years to pay it off. They have a $400,000 fine that they have to pay off in 3 years. And then meanwhile, they have to pay it off. They've been put in prison once, and now they're going back to prison again. So basically what they've done is they put them in such a situation that they're going to be forced to sell their ranch, and then the federal government has made it so that they have to sell it to the Bureau of Land Management.
Well, I know that there's been just tremendous support from the Liberty movement, obviously the good folks that came out and helped your family, that there are people just ready to engage on this situation, but unfortunately, the Hammonds right now are not ready for that help, I believe. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to understand that when the people in the militia started coming to the Bundy Ranch, I myself was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that this is actually happening. Of course we were welcoming, but it was like almost like a psychological thing that I had to get over, to realize that the true protection is with the people. And to give an example of that, the federal government had turned their sights on us, trying to take our rights away, our property and our liberties away. And the state has been forced into undue obedience and are too weak to defend us, which was their whole purpose. And the county also was too weak and corrupted to defend us. So it left us completely exposed as a people. And what happened at the Bundy Ranch is the militias and the people and the families and the preachers and everything else that came and they became the defense. But I have to admit, it was something that I had never experienced before or even considered. But it was the only way in which our rights were restored. So the Hammonds are kind of there. It's very difficult for them to accept the possibility that their governments have completely failed and that they're going to have to rely on the people. And that's hard. And plus, the Hammonds are 74 years old. They've been beat down for literally over a decade. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal defense, lost 3/4 of their ranch, and have already been put in prison once already. And they're quite tired. They've been fighting hard for a long time, and they're tired. They want some peace. And so they are very hesitant to, make this stand the only way that it's going to be corrected.
Do you think they'll come around to realizing the power that's there with that organic uprising like we saw with your family? I mean, I know that, and you spoke earlier about how it was just put on your heart that you need to go help this family, and that echoes very much what I felt when I saw the video of you and your family and you being tased and whatnot, and then learning about the snipers being trained on your family, and I knew that at that point I had to get there, that I was not going to allow another Waco or another massacre to happen if I could do anything to stop it. and I wasn't alone. There was hundreds of other people that went, the same thing, just found a way. And it was like, for me, it was like providence. It's opened so many doors and put me on a path now, that I feel, I can only call it providence. But I think that same providence is running here, and if they would open themselves up to it, that they would really see that there really is a bigger plan to keep them safe, and that they can call upon.
Yes. Well, Jason, I 100% agree, and know. Well, not just agree, but I know that providence is involved in this. And if I could, I hope I can trust you with some of these thoughts that I have, and your listeners, because I felt divinely driven to go meet the Hammonds. I felt like I was supposed to. I also felt that I had a lot of fires, or a lot of irons in the fire, if you will, and that, and felt that maybe. Anyway, but I felt driven. I felt like I was supposed to. But one of the things also that I understood before I even went there, and I just tell you this in testimony, if you will, I understood that the Hammonds were eventually going to reject my help. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time. But when I got over there, and then we met with them for 2 weeks, met in their home, and we started restoring the hope that the hopes that they might be able to find, defense in the people. And then what happened is the U.S. Attorney's Office called the Hammonds attorneys and threatened them that if they did not end communications with Ammon Bundy, with myself, that they would detain the Hammonds early and put them in a less desirable prison. And that came from the U.S. Attorney's Office. And once that happened, the Hammonds got afraid. They got afraid that their time to prepare for their families, prepare for their husbands being gone for 5 years was going to be shortened. And also Dwight, being 74 years old, he began to worry about them putting him in one of the worst prisons in the country. And him being old, not being able to defend himself, and not being able to come out basically alive. So those fears started to come in, and they basically told me that they felt it was best that they just swallow what was coming their way and stop communicating with me, so that they did not cause this threat to come true, I guess.
How backwards of a country do we live in now that their freedom of expression, of free association, that now, and I know you've been victim of it, I know I've been victim of it, everyone that was there at Bundy Ranch originally is starting to get these Quad S designations when they fly and being harassed in different ways. But now it seems like it's a whole nother level, that just associating with people that dare stand up and demand due process, that they'll now take even more of your liberties away just because they see us as the bad guys, when we're the ones saying, no, this is not okay, and we're going to stand up and exercise our Second Amendment with our First Amendment and do the right thing. I mean, do you think it's going to get worse with that type of retribution, with how they're thinking there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the reason why this is so important. And everybody has to understand that the reason this is so important is because what they have is they've created, or they have actually accomplished what they want to accomplish, which they have intimidated the Hammonds to the point where they will not stand up for themselves. Okay? And that's exactly what they wanted to do. And so they've intimidated them from speaking out. They've intimidated them from speaking to people like myself, because we're getting the truth out there, and it's exposing them, and they don't want that exposure. This is the piece that we have to understand, that it doesn't really matter whether the Hammonds have the strength or the courage to stand up at this point, because it is our government, all of our government, that is doing this. And they're doing it to them. And also, by allowing them to continue to do it to the Hammonds, they're setting a precedent that will allow or justify them doing it to more people. And so that's why, whether the Hammonds are strong enough or have enough courage to stand or not, that is why we must make sure and see this to the end, that it does not happen again. And I think that can be done very peacefully, and I think that was the intent of the Lord in the very beginning of this, for me and others like you to get involved.
I think you're right, and I can't see it any other way. I mean, you talk about, providence, and I have too. I'll tell you my story with this, and what set me on the path is, I used to own several businesses in Colorado, and a little over a year ago, decided to move up to Montana, sold everything within a couple months. It was just put on my heart. I didn't know what exactly it was I was supposed to be doing. Was pretty lost, but then I saw what was happening with your family, and it was close to Easter that I was doing some praying on it, and by that evening, it was a Sunday, that I prayed in church about what was going on, and just for guidance. And at this point, I did have my radio show, but not really the contacts that I do now. But by the time that evening rolled around, it was set up that I was going to be embedded with Stuart Rhodes of Oath Keepers in his truck at his side through the entire ordeal. And I got to tell you that, every door has opened since then in a way that I can attribute to nothing more than God is choosing certain people to do certain things. And I may be one of those, I don't know. But I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing because, the doors open in miraculous ways when you just open yourself up to it. And I think that we have a whole generation of people that are being called in this way. And that's where we're going to see, it's scary going up against a government like this in ways, but with all the miraculous things I'm seeing, I can't believe it won't turn out any way but victorious, because I think we're being called to do this.
Yeah, the only way, Jason, I'm right with you there. I believe, and you articulated it well. I think the only way that we cannot or will not restore freedom is if we do not have the courage to follow this path that the Lord has given us. If we don't have the courage, because it takes a lot of courage to stand, it takes a lot of courage to do certain things. And but I know that He's guiding certain people. He's guiding anybody who will listen. He's no respecter of persons. He's guiding those who will listen to do certain things, to act in certain ways. And if we have the courage to do it, then I am fully confident that our freedoms will be restored, and we will be able to pass on this beautiful idea. It's almost an idea now of being free. And I know that the Lord is giving us a chance to do that.
Well, I didn't mean to get too religious there, but I mean, when you get it down to the heart of it, this really seems to be a battle between good and evil, and that fortunately, it comes down to those base levels where it seems like there is that type of intervention happening. So, and that's just me being honest about it. So I'm usually not too religious with the show and really going in that, but that's just the way it is, folks, and that's the way I got to call it. So let's talk about what can be done. Is there anything we can do to help out the Hammonds, or do we need to? Is it going to be the next situation that flares up? And we know this is going to continue to happen. We know that this is happening endemically across the country. That it's everywhere. I mean, you guys were the last of a long line of ranching families that had already been pushed out. You were kind of the last family standing in your area. I know Finnegan Lavoie, he's kind of the same thing. And that the Hammonds there, they've had so many other families pushed out. Are we going to be able to help the Hammonds, you think, or are we going? or is it going to be one of these next situations that we're going to have to focus on next?
No, absolutely. This Hammond case is the case, if you will. But this Hammond case, I believe, is going to be more significant than even the Bundy case. And I honestly feel that and honestly can see that. People need to understand that what's happened here and the reason why the Hammonds are in the situation they're in, the reason why the Bundys were in the situation they're in, LaVoy Finnegum, the Red family, Phil Lyman, and so many more that I could never list in probably an hour worth of just names. The reason why they're in this situation is because the federal government has violated the Constitution, because they have usurped authority over the lands and resources inside states. And it's very clear, the Constitution makes it very clear that the federal government does not have authority to administrate or control lands inside the state. And we have allowed them to come into our state and to take them over. And they have found it very profitable to do so. And so they are looking at it as the ranchers and the miners and the loggers and so forth are competition to them. And because they have a monopoly on force, because they have a monopoly in the courts, they are abusing these ranchers, miners, loggers, and so forth to the point where they're giving up. The ranchers and so forth are giving up, and the ones that aren't, they're willing to prosecute them in their own courts. So the point is and the thing that we all have to understand is that all wealth originates from the earth. Everything, our clothes, our homes, this phone I'm talking on, the computers, everything came from the earth. And they understand that if they can control the resources coming out of the earth, they can completely control humanity.
Ammon, I don't mean to cut you off here, but we're coming up on the break. I'd love to talk with you more, but I know your time's valuable, and this was kind of short notice. So if you want to keep joining me into hour 2, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about where people can get more information on the videos you're doing and your family's blog, and kind of plug into the great information you're putting out there on a regular basis as well.
Yeah. Well, the bundyranch.blogspot.com is where you can go. I suggest you read the facts and events there on the Hammonds case. You can also text Bundy to 22828 to get on the email list. But Jason, I real quickly wanted to propose, because I propose a lot of problems and no solutions. I want you to understand where we're at with this. And that is, we are going to basically make demands to the proper agencies that they restore their Hammonds rights to them, that they restore their property rights, their freedom. They remove the fences from around their waters. They restore their hard-earned money back to them by a certain date. And if they are not willing to do that, then we're going to be calling people together to unite.
All right.
And that is the plan. And what people will be uniting for is not to surround the Hammonds, because we can't surround them if they don't want to. It is to restore and enforce the Constitution in that county. And it is very important that people understand what we're doing, and that if we don't make a stand now and we wait too long, I believe we'll be bled out to the point where we won't be strong enough to do it.
Well, I think you're right.
Yeah, this is our government, and the Hammonds should never have to fight this battle on their own. They never should have had fought it at this time at all. If we'd adhere to the Constitution and we'd hold our government to the authority in which we give it, we wouldn't have these problems, and it's time to make it right.
All right. Well, here's the break. Did you want to hold over a little bit with us to hour 2, or do you need to let us go?
I do need to let you go. I really appreciate the time you've given me. and but I do have some obligations that I need to attend to.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I'll talk with you later. Keep me updated. We're going to get this out to the Oath Keepers and all the other affiliate websites we have. And thanks for what you're doing. I follow your video work and your blog and everything else. It's great to actually pick your brain a little bit and get to know you on a personal level. Thanks for everything you're doing, Ammon.
Thank you, Jason.
All right. Bye. All right, folks, stick with us. This is Liberty Brothers Radio Show. I'll be back on the other side of the break. Stick with us.